Hi, everyone. So, for my biology role model, I chose Adele Diamond, a neuroscientist, a current professor of neuroscience at the University of British Columbia, and one of the world's leading researchers in the development of the prefrontal cortex. Pretty cool stuff. But before we get into all that, I want to talk a little bit about where she grew up and her childhood. Born in 1952 to parents Jerome and Mildred Golden Diamond, Adele was the third generation of a Jewish family who had once been the only Jewish family in all of New York City. Her family came from a long line of grocers and farmers, and her mother's side of the family had even owned a store named Golden Pickle Works Co. When she was very little, her family moved from the Bronx, a rather poor neighborhood, to a bit more of a middle class one in the Queens area, where she ended up going to school. Adele was the first from her immediate family to graduate from high school or to attend college, and what better way to celebrate this achievement than by graduating as valedictorian of her class? Just beginning on her long journey of education, after attending John Brown High School for all 4 years, Adele then went to Swarthmore College, where she majored in sociology, anthropology, and psychology. Apparently, this wasn't enough for her, though, because she then went on to Harvard to get her PhD in psychology. But where's the neuroscience stuff, you might ask? When did she start pursuing it? Well, apparently Diamond never really thought of becoming a neuroscientist until something came up later on in her educational career. That is what we'll talk about later. But as far as her education goes, after Harvard, she then went on to get a postdoctoral fellow at Yale University Medical School. Having turned down one of her initial thesis topics that Adele had actually been given money for, she came back to a question that Jerome Kagan had asked during her first year of graduate school. If infants all over the world show the same cognitive changes at roughly the same time, those changes cannot be due entirely to learning or experience because their experiences are too diverse. There must be a maturational component. What might that maturational component be? To answer this, Adele Diamond decided to go from Harvard to Yale University School of Medicine and was funded to do research on this topic, having made the hypothesis that the prefrontal cortex was making possible these impressive cognitive advances. One interesting hobby that Adele has and finds very enjoyable is dancing, but not ballroom dancing. Dr. Diamond says she prefers the dances where you aren't expected to look over your partner's shoulder and flit around a ballroom. She loves dances like the salsa, swing, and tango. Some of Dr. Diamond's work, as has been previously mentioned, was the research she did in being one of the first to correlate the prefrontal cortex with executive functions. Executive functions include planning, working memory, and inhibition. At the beginning of her research, she especially looked at young children, 6 to 12 months, and the development of the prefrontal cortex through this stage because so much growth happens then. She continues to do research, finding the best ways for children to learn according to how the prefrontal cortex is structured. I personally admire Dr. Diamond for many reasons. And of course, one of them has to be because she discovered things about the brain, and especially the prefrontal cortex, that has played a role in our further understanding of child development. But I'm also appreciative of her effort to make people realize that the education of children, directly linked to the development of the prefrontal cortex, depends not only on mental stimuli, but has to take into consideration the needs of the child as a whole. A happy, healthy child who is curious and delights in the make-believe is one who will ultimately succeed in learning better and faster. In 2022, Adele Diamond and some of her colleagues designed an experiment called Effects on Capoeira on Children's Executive Functions, a randomized controlled trial. This was to test a hypothesis which they had come up with that linked the involvement in intense and rather difficult activities with the development of the prefrontal cortex. The activity they chose was capoeira, which is a Brazilian martial art that combines dance, acrobatics, and music. The experiment was conducted by selecting a certain number of children and randomly assigning them to either the control group or the experimental group, where the experimental group would partake in capoeira sessions 3 times a week, and the control group would not. As you can see, these are the results from the experiment above. In every area, academic achievement, executive function composite score, agility, and touch test disc, the students who were part of the experimental group, who took part in the capoeira classes, received better results or performed better on tests than students who did not. This confirmed what Adele Diamond and her other colleagues had hypothesized, that engaging in this very active and rather difficult physical activity helped develop the prefrontal cortex in a way that improved not just fine motor skills, but also helped with learning in general. And unfortunately, this is where our time together ends. Thank you so much for watching. I hope that through this short video you have come to understand and appreciate Adele Diamond and her research as much as I have. I look forward to looking more in depth at her work in the future. But if you have any questions about the specific research topics of hers that I presented here, on the following slides are some references and links to where I found all this information. Again, thank you so much for watching, and I wish you the best of luck on finding topics and people that really fascinate you.